Hello and welcome to World Report. I'm Colleen McEdwards. Good morning to our viewers in Asia and hello to those of you watching around the world. Here are our top stories for you right now. We are watching the situation very closely in Syria, where aid workers say the government has given them the go-ahead to enter the besieged city of Homs. Residents in Bab al-Amra are said to be in dire need of food and medical supplies after this week's onslaught in that neighborhood. Rebel fighters say they retreated from Bab al-Amra to protect civilians from further attacks by regime forces. Two Western journalists who had been trapped in Homs have now made it to safety. French officials saying that Edith Bouvier and William Daniels have crossed into Lebanon. Bouvier was injured in a government attack on Bab al-Amra last week. Journalists Marie Colvin and Remy Oshlik died in that strike. Well, Iranians head to the polls Friday. They are voting in parliamentary elections. Campaign workers are distributing leaflets. They are plastering candidate posters in Tehran. Some 3,400 candidates are running, all with the approval of Iran's Guardian Council. This is Iran's first election since the controversial 2009 presidential contest, which critics say was essentially rigged. American, European, and Palestinian democracy activists on trial for fraud in Egypt left the country Thursday on a U.S. military plane. They work for non-governmental organizations whose offices were raided back in December. The U.S. State Department says their employers paid $332,000 bail for each of the activists. A State Department spokeswoman says whether or not they return for the trial is going to be up to them. Well, we are closing in on the one-year anniversary of Asia's huge earthquake and tsunami. The images of that horrific day are still very vivid, partly because of the overwhelming number of videos that were taken at the very moment of impact. Kyung-la has more.
The very instant the tsunami struck Ishinomaki, a young man trapped in the frigid, rushing waters clinging to a telephone wire. You're watching this entire neighborhood as it's ripped apart from a victim trapped in the middle of it. Capturing it all on his camera. More than 2 million people viewed this clip since it hit YouTube right after the disaster. The teenager shooting the video, 16-year-old Mao Takahashi. From his balcony, Takahashi kept recording.
It was right here. When you were taping that, did you know that you were recording history?
I never thought about it, he says. I was simply panicking. Takahashi's video is just one of thousands on the web showing the tsunami as it happened, making it one of the most recorded disasters in history. Japan is one of the most wired countries in the world. Mobile phone data shows that every single person has at least one mobile phone, and in some cases, two. So when the tsunami came roaring ashore, thousands upon thousands captured it on personal devices.
Is that the real power of the personal recording device in a hand? Being able to transmit that video around the world instantaneously?
To be able to do this in near real time. And to do it to audiences across the globe is unprecedented in how much power it's given the individuals. Because, you know, you had all of this very real footage. It made the incident much more real in people's minds. They no longer have to imagine what a tsunami is. They saw it live.
Making Japan's disaster a shared worldwide experience. Nagata believes the amount of citizen video helped engage governments, aid groups, and individuals to help, and showed humanity at its best in the face of disaster. In Takahashi's case, what you can't see is the most important part of his story. His video ends suddenly. He stopped recording. The man clinging to the telephone wire, Takahashi waded out to him in the tsunami water and saved his life. Kyung-la, CNN, Ishinomaki, Japan.
And do keep it right here on CNN because all next week we are going to have lots of special coverage on the anniversary of the tsunami. That is all next week right here on CNN. Now we have got large portions of New South Wales in Australia flooded or at least facing flood warnings. Look at these pictures. There's a lot of water lying around. The region is dealing with torrential rainfall not seen since early last century. Hundreds of residents are under evacuation orders. There's also heavy flooding in the state of Victoria. So let's find out how weather conditions are right now in Australia, because I know you want to know what's going on. And we've got meteorologist Jennifer Delgado standing by with a forecast. What do people need to know right now?
You know, really, they're going to have to pay close attention to their local authorities, because the rain is going to continue to be a threat even as we go into the upcoming weekend. We're talking totals still quite impressive even over the last 24 hours. And we've been focusing on this rain really, I think, for about the last 5 days to give you an idea of how much rain we're talking about in the area that's been under the gun. We're talking for parts of South Australia, as we just said to you, New South Wales as well as Victoria. But as I stand out of the way for you, we're talking more than 200 millimeters of rainfall has come down across parts. Look at Canberra, very impressive there as well. Let's go to some video and show you the flooding situation. We do know that homes have already been inundated with water. Residents, reportedly 1,700, have been evacuated. And the problem is those rivers are likely to continue to rise, and some of those could burst their banks and threaten homes like what you're seeing in that video there. As I take you back over to our satellite, this same trough of low pressure is still riding right along this boundary system. That is going to be the fuel for more storms as we go through today as well as tomorrow. And the heaviest rainfall is going to be affecting southern parts of Australia. And you can see anywhere in red, this is where the flooding is going to be the greatest risk. We could still see another 100 millimeters of rainfall, and this is a forecast as we go through Saturday. Colleen, this is a bad situation there. Of course, in Australia, they have been struggling with the flooding, remember, from last year. So they need a break and a time to recover from this.
Absolutely, Jennifer. Thank you so much for bringing us up to date on that. Appreciate it. Now let's get you up to date on the markets, because trading is underway in Australia and on the New Zealand markets as well. Here's a look at the numbers for you. In Sydney, the S&P ASX 200, it's actually edging up about 0.5%, not bad. And in Wellington, there you go, up nicely as well, 0.65, pretty much at the open there. Okay, we'll take you back a bit here. This is a look at the end of the trading day on Wall Street. And yeah, those are smiles on people's faces, because there was some upbeat economic news, especially out of the banking sector, and that led the way for a positive looking day. There are the closing numbers. Yeah, we've got the Dow. It was edging up. NASDAQ up nicely as well. In the S&P 500, it closed up 0.62%. Changing priorities. European leaders look to switch their focus from crisis to growth. And for sale, a home worthy of one of the greatest athletes in the world. Look at this place. But it's got a price tag to match, that's for sure. We're going to tell you who's putting this $29 million mansion on the market, and we'll tell you why.
The essence of incredible India. Scenic, serene, sublime.
Piers Morgan tonight. Newsstream. World Business Today. International Desk. Tonight on CNN. In Japan, disaster struck. Now see how the country has begun to rebuild. How have people picked up the pieces?
I now act, not just with my head, but with my heart.
And helped each other in the recovery efforts. What is getting the economy back on track? How is Japan rethinking its energy sector? Join CNN's Anna Coren and Kyung La in Japan and see how the country, businesses and people are recovering. Rebuilding Japan, all next week in World Report, only on CNN.
Traveling north to find you. Train was beating the wind. Immerse yourself in the incredible. Search any content and browse the web with the new Samsung Smart TV.
Welcome back. Well, for the past 2 years, the Eurozone debt crisis has really dominated every European Union summit that has gone on since then. And as European leaders now gather in Brussels this time around, their new priority is likely to be tackling record high unemployment. Our Charles Hodson is there for us live. Is the focus really changing, Charles, or does it just feel so good to finally say that?
Well, yeah, it isn't exactly a crisis. What crisis? I think these European leaders know that they would be setting themselves, if you like, big hostages to fortune if they were to do that. But it's midnight here. They've been having a lengthy dinner at which they discussed the economic situation, leaving Greece kind of on one side. That was dealt with by finance ministers, and I'll circle back to that in a moment. But in terms of the crisis, if you like, they've really switched to the other big crisis, and that is the crisis in growth or lack of it. It is the crisis in jobs or lack of them. And it's the crisis of hope, actually, or lack of that. I mean, we heard in concrete terms on Thursday that Eurozone unemployment had edged up for a fourth month to 10.7%, and that headline inflation had edged up from 2.6 to 2.7%. The European Central Bank wants to keep it at just 2%. So that really needs to be addressed. But at the same time, obviously, the question that still people are worrying about is what happens with Greece. And that was what we heard about at the press, one of the things we heard at the press conference after the meeting.
So I'm sort of having deja vu all over again as, you know, it unfolds with your analysis there and your reporting. So, I mean, can you characterize it for me a little bit? I mean, where is Europe now as this summit gets going compared with, I mean, let's just say a year ago or so?
Well, in terms of Greece, maybe we can just listen to what Herman Van Rompuy said at that press conference just within the last hour. Let's listen.
The Greek authorities have taken decisive legislative action over the past 10 days, living up to their prior commitments, and we commend them for this. Eurozone leaders support the efforts undertaken by Greece and the assistance offered by the European Commission to strengthen the country's institutional capacity. Improving also tax collection is a case in point.
So we're looking at cautious good news on Greece, bit of cautious good news also on Portugal and Ireland. But really, you know, to try and characterize the situation that we're looking at the moment, Colleen, I think, you know, broadly speaking, things are getting better. The euro is a little bit stronger, but these problems keep popping up like moles out of the lawn, you know, like, for example, suddenly there's got to be an Irish referendum on the big European Stability Pact that will be signed here in about 8.5 hours from now. That was a bit of a shock. We've got the German Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court, saying, wait a minute, no, some of these fast-track decisions, we need more parliamentary oversight. There are all of these unforeseen little problems that keep cropping up, and I suspect will keep cropping up. It's a long time before we can say, whew, we're out of the crisis here, Colleen.
Yeah, you bet. Charles Hodson there for us. Charles, thank you so much. Good to talk to you. Well, down yesterday, up today. U.S. financial markets are still trying to find a bit of a direction. Here's Allison Cossack with today's summary for us.
Stocks rose on Thursday, lifted by mostly positive economic data. A report from the labor market and strong retail sales overshadowed a disappointing reading on the manufacturing sector. At the close, the Dow rose 28 points to 12,980. The Nasdaq and the S&P 500 also finished higher. Fewer people than expected filed for first-time jobless benefits last week. Initial claims fell by 2,000 to 351,000. And consumers opened their wallets in February. A host of retailers reported much better than expected sales last month. Gap was one standout. Its shares jumped 7%, following a 4% gain at stores open at least a year. The auto industry also released strong February results. Chrysler reported a 40% increase in U.S. vehicle sales, while Ford's climbed 14%, and General Motors rose about 1%. Shares of GM and Ford rose on the news. That's a wrap of the day on Wall Street. I'm Allison Cossack in New York.
All right. Well, this week, CNN is focusing on rebuilding Asia after the devastating earthquake and the tsunami that struck 1 year ago. Tadashi Yane is the founder of Japanese clothing giant Uniqlo. He was recognized for his humanitarian efforts in the aftermath of the disaster and donated more than $12 million of his own personal fortune to the relief efforts. Quite a story in and of itself. And he's interviewed by our Andrew Stevens. That is going to be on this week's Talk Asia. And Mr. Yana praised the way the Japanese people responded to the disaster. The government, well, not so much.
Are you proud of the way that the Japanese responded?
I think the Japanese attitude following the tsunami was incredible. However, the way it was handled by the government was horrendous. Last December, the government announced that all of the nuclear power plant problems have been solved. That's it. No details were released to the public. Their decision to lie simply to assure citizens is shocking. They think citizens are fools. They should release more information and more details. They must accept global help. Otherwise, it will be disastrous.
Wow, he is not mincing words at all. So watch the full interview with retail billionaire Tadashi Yane on Talk Asia. That is Friday at 6:30 p.m. in Hong Kong. Well, as a basketball superstar, Michael Jordan smashed records on the court. Now his home may be his next record breaker. Jordan is selling his Chicago area mansion. The price tag, it's big, $29 million. So let's take a look. Let's see what all that gets you. There's a lovely shot of it. It's an estate. It's fully furnished. It's got 9 bedrooms, 15 bathrooms. It's got a 15-car garage, just in case you really like cars or have a lot of boxes. And it's got all the modern amenities, of course. It sits on almost 3 hectares. It's only a few kilometers from Lake Michigan, which is a gorgeous spot. There's a golf course nearby, and of course, there's an indoor basketball court. There's got to be, right? Look at that kitchen. If it sells for the asking price, it will be the most expensive publicly listed house ever sold in the Chicago area. Jordan is relocating to Jupiter, Florida, actually, looking for some better weather, I guess, and a smaller home, apparently a $12 million home, really stepping down. Well, still to come, intensifying attacks and growing fears in Syria to tell you about. We are going to hear from our senior international correspondent, Nick Robertson, about the chances that this conflict could end up in an all-out civil war. We'll have his really terrific analysis when we come back.
Asia Business Agenda is delivered to you by FedEx. FedEx connects your business to a changing world.
Coming up on the Asia Business Agenda, on Monday, March 5th, the annual session of the National People's Congress begins in Beijing. China's top legislature will meet for 10 days. On Wednesday, Australia releases quarterly GDP figures.
Nokia Lumia with the new CNN app.
This is a show for the 21st century. The engines of growth will be the global emerging markets of today, and that's what the Global Exchange is all about.
Global Exchange on CNN. CNN Tuesday, a pivotal point in the race for the Republican nomination. Super Tuesday. 10 states will vote. Join CNN for live coverage from across the US and up-to-the-minute results. Coverage Tuesday, only on CNN.
Well, rebel fighters in Syria say they pulled out of the Bab Amr neighborhood in Homs to protect civilians from further attacks by regime forces there. So how significant is all of this? It's a big development, and we wanted to find out more about it. So we brought in our Nick Robertson just a short while ago. He is tracking developments in Syria from neighboring Lebanon.
It's very significant. This is the first time the Free Syrian Army have had to back down in such a significant way. It sends a message to all the sort of opposition supporters out there that where the Free Syrian Army is defending them, particularly in those communities that are very isolated, that can be surrounded and are surrounded by Bashar al-Assad's forces, that when he chooses to sort of put the full pressure on that area, there is a limit to what the Free Syrian Army can do. They can call it a tactical withdrawal, as they have done, to save civilian casualties because they're short of weapons and ammunition. But the reality comes down to the same thing in the minds of the opposition, that there may come a time in the houses and homes that they've lived in for so many years where they're going to be forced out. And that's going to be a great concern. And of course, that is exactly the sort of mental state Bashar al-Assad wants to induce in the opposition throughout the country, Colleen.
Yeah, Nick, it is so difficult to cover this with, you know, the inability to get in there on a regular basis and see what we want to see. I mean, to what extent are you hearing from people directly in terms of what's been going on the ground, and what, if anything, do you get as a journalist from the government side?
Well, the government in this particular case has now said that they're in control of Bab Amr, that they are the competent authorities. They're clearly controlling that area very, very, very tightly. This we hear from the International Committee for the Red Cross, and we hear it from the Syrian Red Crescent organization. These are credible organizations, so we have solid information about how the government is going to run Bab Amr now it's in control. Talking to activists, it's become increasingly difficult over the last few days in Bab Amr. Yes, we can now reach them in other places, in other areas of Homs and in other parts of the country. We can talk to people who come out of Syria, activists who come out of Syria. Quite often, in many cases, they come out because they're injured, they're getting treatment here. We can talk to them in the hospitals here. So there is some limited contact there. But the bottom line is, this is not the way you would want to cover what's happening in Syria right now. Being outside the country, not close to what's happening, not sort of having an independent eyes on the situation. It is far from satisfactory, and that's because the Syrian government won't allow us in. It's far from satisfactory, but there is still enough information there to be able to say credibly what is happening. And what is happening is the people have been bombed out of part of Homs.
Yeah, and it's far from over, too, isn't it? And I mean, officials are saying, State Department officials saying that the longer this conflict goes on, the greater the chances they believe of a full-scale civil war. There's got to be a lot of concern about that.
There is. There's a town not too far from Homs. I was talking to a freelance journalist who just came out of there last night. It had 7 days in that town. And he described a situation where in this particular town, the opposition were having a rally, a big rally on a Friday. And what was described as a Christian family, typically the Christians in Syria have been loyal to the government. What was described to him as a Christian family came out and shot at that opposition rally. 6 people were injured. And that precipitated the Free Syrian Army going after this Christian family, getting in a gun battle with them. And you can see how this sort of just grows sectarian tensions across the country. So it's not the Free Syrian Army not getting into a firefight there with government forces, but people really sort of taking up weapons and acting for the government, if you will. And that's when it begins to sort of, you know, sow the sparks, if you will, that set alight a civil war. So it's easy to see how at some point this just will gain a momentum where it's community or house and family against another house and family, community against community. That's a civil war. It's so close to it already.
All right, and thanks for that to our Nick Robertson. We're going to turn now to Australia because parts of the southeastern area of Australia are enduring the worst flooding that they have seen in decades. Ben Lewis of Network 10 joins me now from the scene of some pretty bad flooding. Ben, geez, I can see by your shot there, there is a lot of water around you.